Okay, folks, you've been more than patient. If you listened to the prelude to this episode, then you've been waiting for long enough, I suppose. I've been researching the topic of Marc Bolan for a few days, and obviously, I started this whole idea when I was listening to T Rex and noticed a few similarities between Mr. Bolan's songs and content and Mr. Barrett's. So, let's go ahead then and break down, did Syd Barrett, Marc Bolan, and T Rex? Now, if you've been following along with this series, what I like to do is track connections. It's up to you really what you think they might mean. As far as I'm concerned, there are three types of connections when I find similarities between artists or musicians. One is, of course, that they're just indirectly influencing one another. In other words, they're aware of one another's work. Perhaps there are aspects of their work that they're breaking down and utilizing in their own music or in their own art. And that would seem to be a fairly distant form of influence. A second one, I think, would be the possibility that perhaps there is a form of cooperation going on. Perhaps that they are talking with one another for whatever reason. Perhaps they have some informal agreement to do work for one another or to help put together music. And then the last, I think, would be the most direct, which is where people actually have songs that for some reason they're giving to one another. Now, in our Peeling Syd Barrett series, I did mention the Beatles book. And in that book, they mentioned giving the Rolling Stones one of their first hit songs and the rationale for that. So, and if you haven't had a chance to check out Peeling Syd Barrett, I suggest you do so. I'll be running through a lot of tendencies of Mr. Barrett, and if you have not gone through that series and spent some time considering Mr. Barrett, you might not recognize the connections. So, again, I'm going to show the connections. You decide. Do you think it's just that they're influencing one another, that there is some form of cooperation going on, or is there some kind of direct writing going on? And, of course, that direct writing is mentioned by the band Pink Floyd in the Edginton interviews. That was their plan with Mr. Barrett when the group finally kind of decided that they wouldn't have him leading the band anymore, that he would just kind of take a reserve role and be writing material in the background. So for this video, I'm going to do a number of things. I'm going to run through some background information, and then I'm going to, and that'll include some questions that I have, and then I'm going to break down a number of songs, and here are the songs that I want to break down. Now, just forewarning, of course, I'm choosing these songs for a reason, so that kind of skews information already, because these are songs that I kind of am curious about. And the reason I'm curious about them is, of course, that there's a little bit strange things that I've noted in these songs. So I want to discuss The Wizard, I want to discuss Deborah, 1 Inch Rock, Ride a White Swan, Hot Love, Get It On, Life's a Gas, Woodland Rock, Jeepster, Telegram Sam, and then Cadillac. And these are all songs that in some way or another, they have an interesting story to them in a way, and they also potentially, in my opinion, have things about them that are a little bit curious as they relate to Syd Barrett. Now, I don't just want to talk about Mr. Barrett, and that's part of the reason this has taken so long to put together, because Marc Bolan is quite an interesting character, quite a strange life, and I think in this case you could say that truth really is stranger than fiction with Mr. Bolan. I suspect at his core he's a very regular person, but there are so many strange occurrences and stories around this guy that he's very, very much like Mr. Barrett. Very similar, in my opinion. So let's go through our beginnings like we normally do. I like to do corrections and statements from previous episodes, so let's go ahead and do that. The first thing is we've had a number of new people sign up. If you're new, thanks for doing that. We had quite a few actually sign up just recently, for me anyway. I mean, I'm still not even at 100 subscribers, so having like 15 people join up is it's really cool, and not just because of the material, but also because it shows the, I think, the longevity of the material and the respect people have for it, the love and respect that they have for it, which is pretty cool to me, because I really love this era of music and the musicians of that time, for whatever reason. And part of that is because I suppose it's because I can feel so much of the spirit of this music in later music as well, and I haven't even delved into that at all yet, but there's so many similarities between the Seattle grunge movement of the 90s that feels similar to this late 60s, early 70s kind of music, in my opinion. At any rate, this music and this time frame really are kind of wonderful, and for that reason I think it has a lot of longevity and a lot of dedicated followers to it. So one of the things I want to kind of call out are some corrections. So one of them is that in Did Syd the Wall, I mentioned the character of the gunner, and I'm going to try to keep this short, obviously, but if you haven't watched my Did Syd the Wall series, I suggest you do so. At least the first episode. The second episode I break down lyrics. The first episode is largely about the movie. So one of the things I break down in the second episode is this idea of a gunner and the gunner's dying dream. And I thought there must be another character who's called a gunner. And then I realized that Mr. Waters' father was a fusilier. And fusiliers were, in the beginning at any rate, they were equipped with flintlock firearms. And for that reason, they were often stationed with artillery. So fusiliers often were associated with artillery, and because Mr. Waters' father was a member of the Fusiliers, the gunner's dream actually could be the dream of his father. Now, you take that however you like, but that at least now makes sense to me, that the gunner is not a separate character in that opera or story, but is actually someone that is specifically, or an idea that's tied to his own past, which makes sense because that's in a number of other aspects to the story of the wall. Now, another thing I guess that I kind of want to call out is that previous episodes I've made some mistakes. So in the episode leading up to this, the prelude, I messed up some of the dates, and I don't know if you noticed that or not, but I messed up a few of the dates because I didn't notice that they weren't changing in the editor. So some of the dates below songs don't really make sense, and I'm not going to go back and correct all this stuff. It's unfortunate, but it's, like I said, I just want to make these things and kind of move on. Another thing that I kind of want to call out from the previous video is that I forgot to include something, and this will be a little bit important later on, and that's in the song, I believe Hot Love, where Marc Bolan sings "She's My Woman of Gold," or my Woman in Gold. I really wanted to include that in the song, and I forgot it. So I'm going to discuss a number of references that I make within that video, that cut up video, and then perhaps if you're a little bit confused by it, then hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense. Now, the last thing that I want to say about the previous video is that I got a comment from someone saying, I think you're kind of, I guess, I can't remember exactly what the word choice was. I don't want to just throw their comments up here because I'm not sure that, they're cool with me talking about it. But essentially they were saying they didn't really think that there was anything going on. And that's part of the point of this, is just to have a discussion about it. I realize some people will say that they don't think that there's something going on. Now, what people mean by something going on, I don't really know. I will say this. If you study Marc Bolan and if you study Syd Barrett, there is no denying that Syd Barrett was at least an influence on Marc Bolan, even if it's just stylistically and the way that he dressed and presented himself. If you study the subject, you will realize that, at least in some superficial manner, Mr. Barrett was influencing not only Marc Bolan, but the glam rock movement that came after Marc Bolan. Now, I'm going to provide a number of videos that are in the description. So I'll just kind of call out some of them really quickly. One is, well, there's two actually. One is called Melk Weg, Melkweg. I don't know who's posted this. I'll put the information here, and I'll link it in the beginning. It's a wonderful video. It's all audio, and it has music with Mr. Barrett in it. And I can't recall if it's all. I think it's a mix of his music with Pink Floyd and his solo material. And it's wonderful because it's new. And by new, I mean I haven't heard it before. It sounds like pirated music. So music that somehow got loose and was released in some form and has been posted by this person. This is one of the wonderful things, in my opinion, about internet and YouTube, is that you can find so much information being posted by people that isn't necessarily tied to a direct narrative. Another thing is, of course, that I kind of was taking a clip from his 1974 recordings, and I'll link those that music here. Now, I just want to make a few kind of points about his 1974 recordings as we laid them out in the previous video. There are, if you listen closely, he's just kind of jamming on his guitar, and as I mentioned, he didn't show anyone any lyrics, which means either that he didn't have any, or that perhaps he was making a joke, or perhaps he was making a statement. But if you listen to those songs, there's a couple songs in there that I recognize as being related to other songs, and you have to do that on your own. The easiest one that I noted in the comparison is his guitar riff tied with Get It On, the opening guitar riff of Get It On. So what could all of that mean? I don't know. We're going to try and break it all down here, and we'll try to get kind of a feel for what some of the influences are, at least between Mr. Barrett and Mr. Bolan. Now, I don't want to do a really oversimplified version of this. There are a lot of videos, and I was just looking through things with, you know, I don't know, 150,000 views of 11-minute videos of true life of Syd Barrett and all these things. And after spending time reviewing Mr. Barrett, I can honestly say that I don't know how someone would think that they could understand Mr. Barrett in an 11-minute video. I don't understand how people would try to compress the material in that way and deliver it to one another. It's a little bit disingenuous, in my opinion. And in a way, of course, that's something that I'm going to be doing here with Marc Bolan. I'm going to be putting together a single video about Marc Bolan, who I believe is quite a complex character. And as we all are all quite complex, and it can take many months to get to know a single person, and that's actually spending time with them and talking with them. So understanding one another, especially someone that you're only seeing through the filter of pop media, is basically impossible, and in my opinion. And putting together really short videos that kind of simplify everything is a little bit disingenuous, and I'm a little bit wary of that. Let's just put it like that. So I'm going to try and make a few points, just a few points about Mr. Bolan that are of note to me, that show that he may have had some form of connection with Mr. Barrett or been influenced by him. Now, the first is, of course, that Marc Bolan is noted to have kind of hung around with Dougie Fields. And if you don't know who Dougie Fields is, basically, I'm going to be assuming in some ways that you know the history of these people. But Dougie Fields was Mr. Barrett's flatmate for quite some time. This is in the early 70s. And Marc Bolan used to come around and play. And Dougie also would listen to Mr. Barrett play guitar and do his songs. So On page 57 of Mick Rock's book, Psychedelic Renegades, Dougie specifically mentions that Marc Bolan had come around to his place and played Bang a Gong, Get It On, so the intro to it, and he thought it was okay, but I think his words were that it was no Bob Dylan. So, isn't that interesting that Marc Bolan would come around and play guitar and hang out with Dougie Fields, and I'm assuming that there's a little bit of an overlap there, and there's a reason why I assume that there is a little bit of an overlap there, and that is because Pink Floyd actually played gigs with T-Rex early on. You may not be aware of that. This fact is documented in on page 319 of Dark Globe by Julian Palacios. He specifically mentions that Pink Floyd was leaving to play a gig with T-Rex. How many gigs they played with them, with who, I don't really know. But this is around the time they were transitioning away from Syd Barrett, and Bolan also went to go play guitar with Dougie, per his memory now, around the time that Syd had moved out. So how much overlap is there? How much overlap do you think that is there? I don't really know, but that shows not only that they have mutual friends, but that they actually were sometimes playing gigs together. And as we know from our previous episodes, Syd, although he may not have even been playing with the band anymore and did Syd Dark Side of the Moon, we noted that he still had shown up to at least one of their shows of Dark Side of the Moon. So there may still be some kind of interaction there. Now, the second connection that's very strange, in my opinion, is June Child. Now, I am aware of a marcbolan.net website or something like that, and they make a series of claims about influences of Mr. Barrett and things that perhaps Miss Child had said. I don't know if I can verify all that, so I'm not going to use it, but I will show you the website. You can check it out on your own. And essentially what I would like you to know is that at the very least, June Child was a form of friend to Mr. Barrett, another friend. On also in Dark Globe, page 310, June Child specifically references that Mr. Barrett would show up at her place at early in the morning, often quite dirty, running around, scared. Perhaps he was hanging out with kind of questionable folks, and you'll just have to read it on your own. But the basics of that is you have to wonder then if he's, showing up at her house, and this is, I'm assuming, before she was involved with or married to Marc Bolan, that perhaps Syd Barrett viewed her as a very special kind of a friend. Let's put it like that. Someone that he could trust. And for Mr. Barrett, if you know anything about Mr. Barrett, that would be very, very important. So, actually, I'm sorry, that's on page 328. So that's on page 328. Now, the other reference, the other reference I believe involves June Child helping to get Mr. Barrett right for a concert that was going badly. So page 310 and page 328 kind of reference her closeness to Mr. Barrett and helper or assistant or manager and working as a van driver. Now, some of those stories in Dark Globe are absolutely corresponding with the website marcbolan.net. So that makes me think that there's some truth to what's being presented in the material, but I don't really know. Now, June Child and Marc Bolan, I believe, started dating around 1968 or so. And they were together for quite some time. I'm going to say like 4 to 6 years or so. And I believe that they ended up breaking up around 1972 or 1973. We'll get into that here a little bit later on. Now, I don't normally like to discuss people's personal lives because I don't think it's really important. But what is important here to understand is how this may have impacted the music. Because, of course, if you are of the mindset that perhaps Mr. Barrett, Mr. Bolan may have been friends, and that perhaps they also were sharing a mutual friend in Miss Child, and then the relationship between her and Bolan soured, then that obviously would have impacted, in some ways, the possibility of cooperation between the people involved. So, there's one more thing that I kind of would like to point out before we move on, and that is, of course, that as we've mentioned, Mr. Barrett's family were Quakers. Now, this doesn't really necessarily seem to be overly important, but I want to point out the importance of kind of trying to understand how other people view words and the word choices that they use. Now, the reason this is important is, of course, on page 112 in Mick Rock's book, Psychedelic Renegades, Mr. Barrett relays that he would like to have lots of money and be able to take care of his friends and buy food for them and things like this. So there is an expressed desire by Mr. Barrett to have lots of money. For what reason? Well, to be able to take care of his friends. Well, what is meant by take care of? I don't really know. He didn't ever, at that time, really seem to have a whole lot of money. He did have some money. But what is meant by take care of people? And of course, if you are a songwriter of note and ability, and you're dealing with another musician, the way that you could help them would be to help write songs for them. Another question I have is, what is meant by friends? Well, as we've noted in our Peeling Syd Barrett series, Mr. Barrett's family were Quakers, and the word friend is of very specific importance to Quakers. And even if that definition of friend changed over time, the impacts of someone's understanding of that term friend would maintain throughout that person's history. So what you and I use as the term friend may not be the same to someone else. For example, the Romans had a term called being a friend of Rome. What is a friend of Rome? Well, for them it was a political statement. It was a political statement that that basically meant that if you get in trouble, I'm going to help you out. And for Quakers, friend has a very specific meaning as well. So because Mr. Barrett has a background in that, did it flavor his idea of what it meant to be a friend? And is he extending that to the people around him that he considers to be his friends? I don't know that this is something answerable. I'm only pointing out that that very word, friend, can mean different things to different people. And this is kind of a difficult one to explain, I guess, but even within Christianity itself, you have a person like Jesus who specifically seems to be saying that his family are the people that are with him and not his own family that he was born to. Very strange statement, but perhaps, as we've noted in Mr. Barrett's work, a very strong Christian idea, baseline Christian idea that's underpinning things. So what exactly does he mean by friends, and how is he going to take care of his friends? What is the influence specifically of that word? And this is important, of course, because it would potentially relay the idea that someone like Mr. Barrett may have thought that by helping friends, he would help develop them, help them also get a taste of the good life, and get them exposure, help develop their material with them, etc. So, that would potentially be quite a, I guess you could say, an important note to make. Now, in my kind of review of things that are tied to Marc Bolan, there are a number of interesting stories or aspects to him. One is, and some of this stuff is quite scandalous in my opinion. There are full documentaries on what happened to Marc Bolan's millions, and we've discussed in our Peeling Syd Barrett episodes the questionable nature of certain people within the music industry. David Bowie himself has discussed the difficulties he went through when he was changing his management, and I would like to point out to you that early in their careers, David Bowie and Marc Bolan were under the same management and production. So, what exactly did happen to all of Marc Bolan's money? He was a tax exile for a number of years, and the nature of what had happened to him when he was in the car wreck is apparently something, there's some very strange stories about it. And his brother, who appears to be a very, I guess you could say, basically a good person. He seems like a regular good person. And the rough treatment that he kind of got from people breaking into his house and stealing things after Mr. Bolan had passed away, it's all kind of dirty. It seems that way. So if you're interested in these topics, I really suggest that you check out what happened to Marc Bolan's millions, and I'll link that documentary here. At any rate, there are a number of interesting kind of statements that are made by Miss June Child, and one of them is that she read Lord of the Rings to Mr. Bolan because he was dyslexic, which is kind of interesting, you know, that he would have this interest in Lord of the Rings and Tolkien. Now we've referenced, of course, that there are Tolkien references already within Mr. Barrett's music. So for whatever reason, and I mean, Tolkien has influenced a lot of people's lives, but it's just kind of interesting that they seem to share an interest in Tolkien. Another thing that I want to kind of point out is that Mr. Bolan did write a book of poetry, and that book of poetry is called The Warlock of Love. Now, the interesting thing, in my opinion, about that book is I think it's a good book. I do have a copy of it. What's interesting in there is that it's completely unique, and that isn't really interesting because it's unexpected. You would expect someone's poetry to be very unique. What's interesting about it to me is that when I go through The Warlock of Love and read it, it's extremely different from anything that I've read that was made by Mr. Barrett. This is important, of course, because it serves kind of as a baseline. It shows that, in my opinion, Marc Bolan is capable of writing his own material, and that he's quite poetic in doing so. But the nature of that poetry is original. It is not like a number of the songs that we're going to review later on. Now, as to the nature of that poetry, I'll just say he's no Sylvia Plath. I mean, he's all right. It's okay. I actually even prefer Jim Morrison's poetry to Marc Bolan's poetry. I think it's... I hate doing that. I hate trying to judge another person's art or poetry and say it's good or bad. It's unique. And if you're a fan of Marc Bolan, I think you will very much enjoy The Warlock of Love. If you're just a fan of poetry, you might not enjoy it as much. But I do have it. I read through it. I would not have read through it if it wasn't interesting. I'll say that. So I did read through all of it. And what was interesting to me was the differentiation between word usage of Mr. Barrett and Mr. Bolan. Now, of course, some people write very, very differently when they're writing poetry from when they're writing music or writing lyrics to songs. So perhaps that's a reason why things would be so different. But I guess that's one thing, and this is kind of another. So I'll give you a kind of a background on a couple of interesting topics to me. The first is that the first song I want to review is called The Wizard. And what's strange about this song, The Wizard, is that Jimmy Page is playing guitar on The Wizard. Now, this song came out in '65, and that's around the time that Mr. Barrett also was starting his musical career. Same time as Marc Bolan kind of coming up and starting and releasing his first single, The Wizard. So why is Jimmy Page playing guitar on The Wizard with Marc Bolan? There seems to be another connection there. Who is he just being paid to do that? Is it just a simple financial transaction? Again, these bands at the time in '65 were quite underground. You had the beginnings of Pink Floyd, you had the beginnings of T-Rex. They were quite underground. They were not pop music. Even the Rolling Stones were kind of breaking out then. But really, it was the Beatles show. And so you have a number of up-and-coming bands, and of course, T-Rex is one of them. Just a side note about T-Rex, just to clear things up real quickly. I do actually very much enjoy T-Rex's music, and I think Marc Bolan is extremely talented. I think he's quite talented in delivery, and he's definitely a showman, and he's inherently a showman. You can tell because even in his interviews and his interactions with other people, he seems quite like Ringo Starr, which is a little bit funny because he actually was pretty good friends with Ringo Starr later on. So they seem to have quite similar temperament in that they're both very gregarious, outgoing, friendly people, and they seem to have that kind of connection between them. It comes across very well on the screen, and it comes across in the delivery of his music. How accurate that is, I don't know. I don't know the man personally. I didn't know him. But it certainly does seem to come across on the camera. So there are a number of songs by Mr. Bolan with T-Rex that I think a lot of Americans don't really know. I do think, though, that many Americans, because of the deep R&B ties of Marc Bolan's music, they would actually very much enjoy T-Rex, perhaps much more than Pink Floyd. So if you're a Pink Floyd fan and you like rock and roll, definitely I think you should check out T-Rex and Marc Bolan's music. Now, of course, one of the concerns I have is if you watch the documentary, you start to wonder, who owns all of this? Who actually is getting funneled money? Because it didn't go to June Child, not until after an extensive legal battle, a tax battle between the British government trying to figure out what's going on with all these taxes, and you have to wonder, where would the music go? It wouldn't go to Roland Bolan, who is his son by Grace. So I don't really know that I would say, go out and buy stuff, but certainly, check out his music. I think that you'll enjoy it quite a bit. I know I do. So I guess that's pretty much it as far as the as far as the nature of the background of the man Marc Bolan. There are a number of strange stories, including him having a deep fear of driving. And he's on the record. He's been in interviews where he basically said, very common, very consistent with Jimi Hendrix, actually, that I forget who Jimi Hendrix was being interviewed by. I think it was, I can't remember who he was being interviewed by, but he specifically mentioned, I'll put it up here if I can find it, that he didn't expect to live too much longer, which is odd to me, that there seems to be this kind of idea within these people that are making really great music, and you would think they're enjoying life. So why do they seem to be so convinced in certain ways that that there is definitely a finite aspect to their life? I don't know. At any rate, let's go ahead then and we'll start breaking down the music. I want to explain to you the connections that I see within the lyrics. Now, mostly the lyrics, not entirely, but mostly the lyrics for a number of Mr. Bolan songs. I'll make a note of the dates that they kind of were released, and let's go ahead and get started. So, the first song obviously is The Wizard. I want to discuss The Wizard because it's kind of the single that brought Mr. Bolan out. It's the single that started his kind of career. And so for that reason, it's quite important in my opinion. Now this song was released in November of 1965, late 65. So let's look at the lyrics. If you would pull up the lyrics on your phone or whatever else. As I mentioned, this is the song that has Jimmy Page playing guitar. And I'll just make one aside here. Why is Jimmy Page playing guitar? I mean, ask yourself that question. Marc Bolan was a guitarist. Why isn't he playing guitar? Well, actually, Marc Bolan, this is just my opinion now. I don't know this for sure. But Marc Bolan came up mostly playing acoustic. So he may have not been quite... might not have had the same chops on electric guitar as Jimmy Page had. Let's put it like that. So let's go ahead and take a look at the lyrics and see what we can see. So the first line discusses walking in the woods and meeting a man that was magic, and he said wonderful things, had a pointed hat upon his head. Now that pointed hat reference is similar to the gnome, and the gnome pointed hat reference, of course, would be in a later date of Pink Floyd's Piper at the Gates of Dawn album. Now, Piper at the Gates of Dawn was released in 67. So we know that's kind of when it was recorded, was not too long before that and released in. But we don't know when these songs are all being written and when they were first being played, because a lot of these bands, like Pink Floyd, had become house bands and were playing gigs and were using music. So it's really hard to know. But just for the record, this song was released in 65. There's a discussion of pointed hat and this kind of idea of a magic man. And he knows why people laugh and cry and why they died, lived and died. And here we have an important kind of an idea of shadows following this person around. And he's walking in the woods. Now, the shadow idea is going to come back up again later. I can't think of too many Pink Floyd songs or Syd Barrett songs that specifically mention shadows, but it seems to be something that is disturbing or distressing to Mr. Bolan. So perhaps that explains why he was concerned with the idea of not being able to live a long life. Now, golden eagles are at this person's door. Of course, eagles are referenced in Flaming, I believe. It's either Flaming or Matilda Mother. It was Matilda Mother, actually. And there's cats and bats playing on the floor. Now, cats, of course, the cat is referenced in Mr. Barrett's song Lucifer Sam, again later. Now, silver sunlight and eyes. That's interesting to me, of course, because silver is not the color of sunlight. Sunlight is yellow, commonly considered to be yellow. So this combination of words does not make sense. It's unique. Why is sunlight silver? Well, the obvious reason, in my opinion, is that poetically, silver sunlight sounds better than yellow sunlight, because you can use the alliteration of the S and L sounds. But also, this idea of silver sunlight in the eyes, in the sky, very similar to Matilda Mother, with the scarlet eagle raining silver on the people, extremely similar to Mr. Barrett's later song of Matilda Mother, and that was again released in 67. The wizard turned and melted in the sky. Now, we're going to see these word combinations come up again later. And for the record, just for the record now, I know that this is Did Syd, but I also want to point out that, as we mentioned, there could be mutual influence happening. And in my opinion, this could be an influence that's the other way. In other words, Mr. Barrett perhaps may have been influenced by Mr. Bolan, and perhaps use some of these ideas. This idea of an eagle and the silver sunlight in the eyes, I don't know. But I do know that there's some kind of connection. There's too many things there that are similar between the two men to, in my opinion, to just be completely random. So let's go ahead then and move on to the next song. Now this song is important, as we mentioned, because around, I believe, 68 is when Mr. Bolan started seriously dating June Child. And as we mentioned, Miss Child was a friend, or at least an acquaintance, of Mr. Barrett. So if you're of the mindset that perhaps they were working together, or that perhaps Mr. Barrett was, I guess you could say, had some form of interest in helping develop Mr. Bolan, then perhaps around this time we would expect to see a connection that's the other way around. I don't know. Now, one of the things that I mentioned is that stylistically, Mr. Barrett very likely had an influence on Mr. Bolan. Now, if you go to that marcbolan.net, they have stories there about June Child making suggestions to changes in his appearance, etc. But I will point out that that androgynous kind of look, that kind of dark androgynous look, was something that was already kind of being done by Mr. Barrett. And it shows in a number of his photos, but most importantly, it's discussed by Nick Mason in the John Edginton interviews. He mentions that in '67, Syd was already kind of doing shows in almost drag. So I think a lot of people like to give Marc Bolan credit for the development of that. Of course, I would say he made it very popular, but there's no doubt in my mind, of course, that that was something that Mr. Barrett had already started to do. So let's look at the song Deborah, which is, again, another kind of a strange song. It has something in it that catches my attention. Now, it just kind of starts off with this Deborah, Deborah, Deborah thing. Now, again, names not necessarily relating to very specific people, but why Deborah, I don't know. Very likely the name is simply chosen because Deborah is like a zebra. Now, these word associations are extremely similar. They remind me of Mr. Lear, who we mentioned may have been an influence in peeling Syd. We discussed Mr. Lear and some of his work, and that reminds me of something here, unfortunately, that I forgot to do, which is in previous episodes, Did Syd the Wall, I was going to show. I guess I'm going to have to make another one now. I'll have to make another one that actually goes into the artwork of Mr. Lear. I forgot to include it in Did Syd the Wall. That's a shame. At any rate, this Deborah-Zebra kind of combination, it sounds very much like Mr. Lear to me. Now, he then continues, if you follow along with me on your phone for the lyrics, he mentions that she has a sunken face like a galleon, and it's clawed with mysteries of the Spanish Main. What clawed could mean, I don't know there, but we'll see this clawed word come back again. Now, these word choices are very unique, in my opinion. So, this song, Deborah, was released in 1968. I'm not sure when the Doors did Spanish Caravan. That's the song that uses the galleon idea. I guess I'll put that up here. But here it is again, the galleon and the Spanish Main idea. And let's continue on. Now, these words do not correspond to word choices that are used by Mr. Barrett. He continues with Deborah, you dress like a conjurer, and your face is hiding beneath the stallion that I'm riding. Okay. Now, that's odd. For a number of reasons. That's an odd imagery. The idea of riding a stallion and tying it to a female is, as I've noticed in the prelude to this is inversion. Assuming that the riding a stallion thing is kind of a metaphor for intercourse, of course. So then we would have the idea of male-female being kind of twisted relating to riding a horse, which is symbolically tied to intercourse in many ways. So that, of course, is used as well in one of Mr. Barrett's songs, and I included the title of that song. This idea of riding backwards and forwards on a stallion horse is included in one of Mr. Barrett's songs, and that was in, I believe, 1970 or 1971. So again, this would be an influence potentially of Mr. Barrett being influenced by Mr. Bolan. And now, of course, again, we don't know when these things are put together in someone's head. We only know when they're recorded and released. So it is interesting to me, again, that connection seems quite strong. The rest of the song doesn't really do a whole lot. It's just a repeating of Stallion and Galleon, Spanish Main, and then a bunch of na 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 na, which is pretty consistent with Mr. Bolan's music. He has a kind of a simple delivery, a sing-songy way of repeating himself. Okay. So let's move on to the next song, 1 Inch Rock. So if you would call that up on your phone or check out the lyrics. It starts with him mentioning that he met a woman and she's spouting prose. She's spouting prose. Interesting word combination there. I kind of like it. Poetic. She has luggage eyes and a Roman nose. Now there is a first kind of a strange combination in my opinion. The idea of luggage eyes, what is meant by that? I don't know, but it has kind of a visual associated with it, and it's not entirely poetic, so there's something kind of happening there. Luggage eyes and a Roman nose, and her body's slung side to side, and she says, much obliged for a park, and he's riding piggyback, and he went to her shack. Very simple word, very much like Roger Waters. The actual words being rhymed, in my opinion, are quite simple. So the next verse kind of starts with going inside and it's a mess, and she's the liquid poetess. And she unties her mouth in her buckskin dress and drinks from a bottle that's labeled tenderness. And so he says he's in one hand and in the other is a can, which is odd because she just said she was drinking from a bottle. So a bottle or a can. I don't know. So she puts him in the can and smiles through the wall. I got the horse. He's 1 inch tall. And she's in a bay leaf trying to hide. I asked her name. She said Germaine. Now, all very unique. Very, very dissimilar to poetry that's used by Mr. Barrett. The only reason that I'm including this is because the song title is 1 Inch Rock. Now, as he runs through the do the 1 inch rock kind of outro, it seems to me that he changes to the claw. So he says 1 inch claw. Everybody's talking about the 1 inch claw. Now, that would be important because that could potentially be inappropriate. It would be a form of combination of rock and claw that's 1 inch. So this, of course, could be another form of sexual inversion and a metaphor that is similar to the idea that's presented in Arnold Layne. In other words, it is not entirely male or female. And this kind of male-female inversion idea we've discussed being consistent with Mr. Barrett's music early on in Pink Floyd. Here is a similar song in '68 that seems to be discussing the interchangeable title 1 Inch Rock with 1 Inch Claw. And obviously, claw has the CL sound. You can kind of figure out what's going on there. So 1 inch clock, let's put it like that. If you tie those two words together, you'll get that. So perhaps that's what's being discussed there, and it's not showing up directly in the lyrics. That's what I hear anyway. Now, when I actually pull up the lyrics, I don't see claw. It just is repeating 1 inch rock the whole way through. But that's not what I hear when I listen to the song. You listen to it, and you decide. What do you think you hear? So the first kind of really, I guess you could say, really interesting song to me, the first really noteworthy song is Ride a White Swan. And part of the reason is, right away, just in the title, Ride a White Swan, this idea of a swan, now is the hour that sleeps the swan, I believe was in Metal. That's one of the lyrics from one of Pink Floyd's songs on Metal. And The Swan, as we discussed in Did Syd Barrett Metal, I believe, is a very, very complex symbol. So I'm not going to go into all the different breakdowns of the symbol of the swan again here. You can watch that if you like there. But let's take a look at the actual lyrics. And now the lyrics I'm looking at say, "Ride it on out like a bird." Now, when I actually listen to the song, I hear "ride in and out like a bird," which means going in and out, and a bird in the skyways, and then riding out like your bird. And then here again is that idea of flying like an eagle in a sunbeam. This was covered in The Wizard, we mentioned, and here it is again, and of course it's also in Matilda Mother. The next verse says you should wear a tall hat like a druid, and a tall hat and a tattooed gown. Okay, there's an interesting word combination for me, because tattooed gown sounds quite similar to words that could be used in other ways. Let's put it like that. So first off, a gown doesn't need to be a gown. It can be a dress. It can be a skirt. There are other words for that. Why is the word gown being used? And that's important, of course, because Mr. Barrett used gown in See Emily Play. He also used the very, very specific tattooed for something that was not appropriate to the tattooed idea. Of course, tattoos are on the skin. So why is a gown tattooed? Well, Mr. Barrett also mentions his brain being tattooed in the song Dark Globe, although again, that is a little bit later, I believe, or perhaps the same time. I'll look it up. It's 1970 is when this song was released, and around that time is when Mr. Barrett also released Dark Globe. So I'll put the dates up here. But a little bit odd, wouldn't you say, that there seems to be something that is a little bit of an See Emily Play kind of a reference going on here. Ride a swan like the people of the Beltane. Now that Beltane reference is another kind of a druid reference. If you're familiar with it, you can go research Beltane if you like. Wear your hair long, can't go wrong. Very simple rhyme. Now the next line about catching a star and placing it on your forehead, and then saying spells, and there you go. The bright star is noteworthy to me because there is a poem called Bright Star, and I'll give you a little bit of the information here. Now, I believe that this Bright Star poem is one of the poems of interest that are mentioned by Mr. Chapman in the end of his book. I will try to identify it here if I can locate the page that it's on. But the Bright Star poem is a very famous poem, and of course the idea of a bright star and the idea of the bright star, or Lucifer, could be mentioned here. I don't know. And as we mentioned in Peeling Syd, that's a complex symbol. It does not mean necessarily what everybody... I shouldn't say everybody. It does not mean what many people assume it to mean. In other words, it is not a uniform symbol. So it's a complex symbol, and it can mean different things to different people. Okay, the next line says that you should take a black cat and sit it on your shoulder. And this, of course, is extremely similar to the song Lucifer Sam, which was released in 1967. This is another combination that I use in the Prelude mix-up song. This idea of having a cat is in the song Lucifer Sam. Having it on your shoulder, that is referenced visually within the song Lucifer Sam by him saying, he's the right side, you're the left side. Having two kind of things on the sides, of course, is represented by having, I guess you could say, good and evil on your shoulders that are kind of talking to you. The next line is, in the morning you'll know all you know. This also is very similar to Mr. Barrett's music, and in particular the song where he says, lay my head down and I'll see what I see. So I'll put that information up here. Now that would either be released in 70 or 71 for Mr. Barrett on the Madcap Laughs or the Barrett album. And then the rest of the song just kind of repeats. So again, you can see there are quite a bit of similarities there, even though the words aren't necessarily exactly the same. The ideas and the visuals that are kind of contained within them are quite similar there. So this is one of the songs that I heard and I thought to myself, okay, I don't know, that's a little bit odd. So let's move on then to the next song, which is Hot Love. So the first bit of this song is, of course, She's My Woman of Gold. Wow, isn't that interesting? Now, this song, Hot Love, was released in 1971. And, of course, Mr. Barrett released Golden Hair. That was one of the kind of prime songs, I guess you could say. For some people, they really liked his song Golden Hair. We have specifically discussed Mr. Barrett's interest in golden hair, his many references to blonde and gold, the various methods of referencing that. And here it is again, My Woman of Gold. Of course, gold could be more than one thing physically, of course, but certainly it could be a reference to the idea of being blonde, and that would be consistent with Golden Hair that was released by Mr. Barrett. So she's not that old. Gold. Don't mean to be bold. Can you hold your hand? Now that again, that is kind of a reticence. That's a sexual inversion. I don't mean to be bold, but of course, being bold is what stereotypically is determined to be male or expected of males. So there is a sexual inversion, which is another indicator of some similarity with Mr. Barrett. The next verse says that she's not a witch, but he loves the way that she twitches, which is funny because again in the song Lucifer Sam is the statement, Jennifer Gentle, you are a witch. So this isn't, of course, they're not the only people that are making witch references. It's just kind of interesting that that they're quite similar. It's a labor of love in Persian gloves. Now, that's a little bit odd. I do recall Mr. Barrett having a song that had gloves in it. I'll put it on here. It was a very strange song. It was towards the end of his, I believe, his Barrett album. It was one of his later songs. And I'm just recalling this now. At any rate, I'll put it up here. But there's another possible connection. Okay, she's faster than the next verse is she's faster than most, living on the coast. Living on the coast. Now, living on the coast in the sand and the beach, very, very similar to Mr. Barrett's music. He has a number of songs, like Gigolo Aunt, where he mentions going to the coast, etc. Now, Mr. Bolan continues with I'm her two-penny prince. But he gives her hot love. Now, this idea of hot love is not unique to either man, but of course, the warm steam kind of references we mentioned are consistent with Mr. Barrett's music as well. The outro kind of is this la 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 la, and that reminds me very much of Jug Band Blues. That's why I crossed it with Jug Band Blues. Again, Jug Band Blues was recorded in late '67, and that's the end of Mr. Barrett's kind of well-known Pink Floyd career. So that la 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 is very similar to Jug Band Blues. And of course, a lot of people sing la 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 la. It's very kind of a sing-songy thing to do. So let's go ahead and move on then to the next song, which is Get It On. I don't want to spend too much time on each song. I'm sorry if I'm kind of rushing through these. Now, the first thing is, of course, as I noted in the prelude, the 74 recording of Mr. Barrett kind of picking on his guitar is exactly the same rhythm and delivery of the introduction to Get It On. Why would he be doing that? I don't know. Perhaps, he's just warming up. Perhaps it's just a really common kind of a rhythm. As we mentioned, it could be a statement. In other words, look at this. Make a connection to something else. Perhaps that's a connection that deliberately is being pointed out by Mr. Barrett. You'll have to decide that on your own. I don't think it's ever going to be knowable. But Let's continue on. This idea of being dirty and sweet is extremely interesting. There are certain things in this song. Now, you'll notice as we run through this song, it's very wordy. So normally, Marc Bolan's songs are very simple. He has a lot of sounds that he kind of throws in. La, 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 stuff like that. Kind of noises that he makes. But this actually has quite a bit of lyrics to it. So let's see kind of what we got. This idea of being dirty and sweet. Why would someone be dirty and sweet? I don't know. The next line is that they're clad in black, don't look back, and I love you. So why would someone be clad in black? I don't know. It has kind of a witchy feel to it, and we just discussed a song that was kind of discussing not being a witch, etc. That they're dirty and sweet, they're slim and weak. Again, very simple, kind of a nice flow to it, but very simple word choices. The teeth of the Hydra upon you. Now, in the video for this portion, I included one of Mr. Barrett's artworks, Little Red Rooster. And for that, well, the reason could be, of course, that the teeth of the Hydra is representative of the problems of the world, because when you think you have one problem done, you have two more that replace it. So when you're dealing with the problems of the world, you're dealing with the Hydra, essentially. The teeth of the Hydra. So why would someone be dealing with the teeth of the Hydra? I don't know. It could be a reference to many heads kind of biting someone. It could be a reference to the troubles of the world. So this person apparently has the problems of the world upon them, and they're dirty sweet, but they're my girl. You're my girl. So there is a possessive that's tied to this. We know that the yous in this song, the pronouns used, are being used to describe you're my girl. Okay. So let's continue on now. Now, the lyrics for this kind of say, get it on, bang a gong, get it on. Now, when I listen to it, I don't hear that. I hear get it on, when you're gone, get it on. So, get it on, when you're gone, get it on. Now, perhaps perhaps this is some kind of joke. I don't know. But I don't hear him saying bang a gong. I hear him saying get it on, when you're gone, get it on. Now, there is a lot of pronoun ambiguity there. I'll just point that out. If this is get it on, when you're gone, get it on, there are reasons to kind of to explain why that might be covered up with a lyric like bang a gong. Obviously, the lines get it on when you're gone aren't really clear as to who is getting it on. So, who is getting it on when you're gone? There's three ways of reading that. One, I'm getting it on when you're gone. So I'm being, I guess you could say, promiscuous. You get it on when you're gone. So you're being promiscuous. Or there's a third choice. We get it on when you're gone. Well, how can we get it on when you're gone? Well, the you're in that case wouldn't be we. It would be some other person. And this idea of getting it on when someone else is gone is kind of captured in the idea or the song Julia Dream. You can go watch Did Syd Julia Dream. That seems to be referencing the possibility of a third person, that when they're gone, there's something else going on. So you'll have to decide that on your own. But that's just kind of an interesting take on the song that I've struggled with for quite some time to try and figure out. Okay, the next verse says that this person is built like a car and a hubcap diamond star halo. What a wonderful combination of words. Hubcap diamond star halo. Now that reminds me, of course, of the song Terrapin. That was released in 1970. Again, this song, Get It On, is released in 71. Where there's a reference to a star being above someone in Terrapin, the star above you, crystal blue. Here we have a hubcap diamond star. So a diamond, of course, crystal. star above you is crystal blue. This diamond star halo, very similar to terrapin. And you're built like a car. Why someone would be built like a car, I don't know. And I don't know, frankly, I don't know why Marc Bolan would be writing a song saying someone is built like a car when they don't like cars, if you follow what I'm saying. Marc Bolan didn't drive. He was afraid of cars. Why would he say that someone is built like a car? I really don't know. I don't get it. I mean, maybe it's a reference to headlights or something. I don't know. Maybe it's a reference to headlights associated with aspects of female anatomy or something. I don't get it. Anyway, your untamed youth. So what that has to do with a car, I don't know. That's the truth. Your cloak full of eagles. You're dirty sweet and you're my girl. Okay. So again, here's an eagle reference, a complex symbol. It's a solar symbol for most cultures. I guess I'm going to look at a dictionary of symbols by J.E. Cirlot. I'll just take a look at eagles because I know it's a complex symbol. So, and we may have done this before, but I'll do it again. So an eagle, in the Egyptian hieroglyphic system, it's tied to the letter A. So it's tied to the beginning. It's tied to the idea of male activity, fertilizing female of nature. It's tied to heroic nobility. It is a symbol of something attacking a serpent, Garuda attacking a serpent. So it's the opposite of the serpent. It is Jupiter's bird. It is represented also in axes, double-bladed axes, a very similar shape. It is also in Christianity used as a messenger from heaven. It's tied to ascension and prayer. Let's see, Dante calls it the bird of God. And is considered to be the opposite of the night bird or the owl, which is often considered to be a bird of wisdom, but also a bird of death. So, a lot of ideas there. Again, that's J.E. Cirlot's Dictionary Symbols, a very useful book for going through symbols quickly. So, let's kind of keep messing with this, I guess. The next verse says that you are windy and wild. You have the blues in your shoes and your stockings. Of course, very similar to the line in Vegetable Man, made with Pink Floyd in 1967. In yellow shoes, I get the blues. Those are the lyrics. Here we have the idea of tying blues and shoes together. Of course, Blue Suede Shoes was an older kind of a song, so tying those two words together as a rhyme is quite common, I believe. Being windy, you're windy and wild, built like a car, you're dirty sweet, and you're my girl. So I just want to discuss that really quick. How can someone be dirty sweet and my girl? The implication is, of course, that they are my girls, so they are somewhat tied to the person and dedicated to the person, but they're also kind of sweet, but also dirty. In other words, they're going around doing things or something, or perhaps associated with other people. Thus the previous teeth of the Hydra upon you. And then the rest of the song just kind of repeats. I'm not gonna go through all the repetitions in there, but there's enough of pronoun ambiguity, which is something that Mr. Barrett seemed to like to play with, that it's interesting to me. And of course, this also is shown in Mr. Barrett's song Effervescing Elephant. Now, if you go and watch Peeling Syd Barrett, Effervescing Elephant, you'll kind of understand the analogy that he's making, and he's doing so through a fable form and tying that in with direct stories. So that does seem to be similar here. And I just also want to point out the idea of being connected to someone. In other words, this person is dirty sweet, but they're my girl. They get it on when you're gone. They get it on. it answers a number of questions. So again, if you look at Julia Dream, one of the questions that we had in Did Syd Barrett Julia Dream is, why is the reference being made to a bride but not a wife? Now, you may be surprised to know that Mr. Barrett actually did have discussions of marriage and having a daughter potentially in the future. And this is on page 200, page 161, page 161 of, I believe, Mr. Chapman's book. So in that book is a discussion that he was having with potentialities of the future and perhaps getting married, but not actually getting married to that person. So all in the discussion there regarding why someone would be mine but not mine, why would they be a bride but not a wife, etc. Now, the next song is Woodland Rock, and I'll just point out that the intro to this song, the rhythm of it, lyrically and also with drums, is extremely similar to Long Tall Sally by Little Richard. And if you go ahead and do the comparison between the two songs, I think you'll notice that. We do know that Mr. Barrett is interested in R&B, of course, but a lot of these rock musicians were influenced by R&B, so, I mean, you can take that as you like. I'm just going to point out that the intro to this is exactly the same as Long Tall Sally. So, let's take a look then at the lyrics. Man on the corner, head in a hat, dance like a gypsy, he's where it's at. Okay, so very simple again. Do the rock, Woodland Rock. Everybody hang out and shout. When is the thing? Everybody swing down. Treats you like a king. Okay, so here again is a reference to royalty. We've mentioned the idea of referencing royalty within our Peeling Syd series. Of course, again, being a king or the king of rock is tied to Elvis, and a lot of early rock and roll music would talk about being the king and the queen of rock, etc. Let's continue on. Met a little mama, sweet, she was gone. Got legs like a railroad, face like a song. Of course, the interesting portion to that is that having legs like a railroad, the railroad reference is within Pink Floyd's music and also, of course, in the design of the See Emily Play single that Mr. Barrett released. So, and I also will point out that this railroad for legs idea is going to be used again by Peter Gabriel later. And I believe that's in Sledgehammer. So, let's continue on then. Everyone do the rock. Wind is in the willows. Oh, what do you know? Right there, there's the wind in the willows. Why is the wind in the willows? Well, that is, of course, tied very much to the Piper at the Gates of Dawn album. That is where that comes from, is the wind in the willows. House is up a tree. So that's extremely similar to Mr. Barrett. I'll just point that out. Now this song, Woodland Rock, I forgot to mention, was released in 1971. So, 1971 release date. House is up a tree. Let's continue on. Sees a changer flowing. He wants everyone to be free. And it just repeats from that point on. So very, very simple things, but there are a few things of note in there. Isn't that interesting? The idea that she has legs like a railroad, and that the wind is in the willows. Interesting. So, I don't know. I don't know what else to say about that. That's kind of interesting connections to make there. Let's look at the next song. Telegram Sam. So this is interesting, of course, to me, or it caught my eye anyway, because of the song. Actually, let's take a look at Jeepster. Let's do Jeepster real quick. And the reason for that is because there's not a whole lot going on here, but I do want to point out one thing specifically about Jeepster that's important. We'll do that after we're done with the song. So let's look again at the lyrics. If you would pull up the lyrics to Jeepster. He says, you're sweet and fine. I want you all, everything to be mine, because you're my baby, my love. I'm just a Jeepster for your love. What is meant by Jeepster, I have no idea. I don't know that it's referencing an actual car at all. Again, why is someone who is interested in cars or driving referencing cars again? You slide good with bones so fair. You have the universe reclining in your hair. What a wonderful word combination right there. This is, I would have to say, of all the poetic things that I have read by Mr. Bolan, this one line, you've got the universe reclining in your hair. What a beautiful word combination. What a beautiful bit of imagery. Extremely similar to the way that Mr. Barrett puts together not just words, but 3-syllable words that capture imagery and are related in sound. So they have alliteration and they're expressing a beautiful idea right there. At any rate, let's continue on. You're like a car, pleasing to behold. I'll call you Jaguar if I may be so bold. So again, this idea of calling someone a Jaguar, it's somewhat like Mr. Lear, but again, we've mentioned the many animal metaphors that Mr. Barrett likes to make in our Peeling Syd series. He does so quite often. Of course, Jaguar could also be a car reference because they're English and there already is a car reference in Jeepster. Okay, so as wild winds blowing upon your frozen cheeks and the way you flip your hip makes me weak. Motivation is so sweet, vibrations burning up my feet. Very, very simple stuff, but an interesting song. So why did I want to discuss this song? Well, this song was not supposed to be released, actually, in '71. Apparently, if you go read about it, you'll find out that Marc Bolan was quite upset that this song was released. Why would this song be something that upset him? I don't know. Perhaps he was saving it. His contract was almost up, and he went and signed on with, I believe, EMI after this. So perhaps he was upset that he wanted to release the song later on a follow-up album. I don't know. I will say that this is kind of, in some ways, this song Jeepster is kind of the last really groovy song that he kind of put out. So he signs a new contract, I believe, with EMI. And then in 1972, he releases a few songs that are of interest to me. Let's look at the first one, and that is Telegram Sam. So Telegram Sam, obviously, extremely similar to Lucifer Sam. Again, here's the 3-1, 3-1, 3-1. We discussed this 3-1 idea, Telegram Sam. So 3-syllable, 1-syllable, 3-syllable, 1-syllable, Lucifer Sam. Also used, of course, by Pink Floyd in Echoes, the song Echoes. Overhead, the albatross hangs motionless upon the air. That 3-1 combination is here in the title of Telegram Sam. So let's take a look at it. Again, we mentioned that if Mr. Barrett may have been working with people, I don't know. He was kind of shy. They had phones then, so is this... they weren't using telegrams, obviously, in 1970. They were using telephones, but telephone doesn't rhyme with Sam, right? That would be, I don't know, Telephone Jones or something. But Telegram Sam gets across the idea of not only a telephone, but also connects it with the idea of Sam, which is something, a title that Mr. Barrett already kind of was discussing. At any rate, I do wonder, if this isn't a reference to actual phone conversations. Telegram Sam, you're my main man. Interesting. He has a connection with whoever this Telegram Sam person is. Who could that be? I don't know. Continues on with Golden Nose Slim, I know where you've been. I don't know why someone would be Golden Nose Slim. I don't know what that means. Purple Pie Pete, extreme alliteration, very much like Mr. Lear. Lips Are Like Lightning, Girls Melt in the Heat. Bobby's Alright, A Natural Born Poet. Out of Sight. Jungle Face Jake, Make No Mistake, Jungle Face Jake. Automatic Shoes, Gimme 3D Vision, California Blues. There's another reference to the California Blues. We discussed this in Did Syd Barrett Led Zeppelin 4? Here's another kind of a reference to the idea of having the California Blues. And Led Zeppelin covered it in their song Going to California. And Having the Blues. Ain't No Square. They have corkscrew hair. Who has corkscrew hair? Well, Marc Bolan certainly did have curly hair, but also Mr. Barrett also did, and that's referenced in a number of songs, including the song by Pink Floyd about having the Hendrix perm. And they finish up with Telegram Sam, and finally, I'm a Howlin' Wolf. Very interesting. In our Peeling Syd Barrett series, we specifically mentioned the photograph of Mr. Barrett pointing to Howlin' Wolf as an influence upon him, and here it is in this song as well. Okay, the last song to discuss, and then we'll be finished, is a song called Cadillac. So, the song Cadillac has caught my attention for a very, very simple reason. And that is to the reference of living in the basement of his home. So, baby, I want to walk you home. If you would pull up the lyrics, I want to walk you home. There's a shadow in the basement. I'm scared to sleep alone. So, earlier, of course, in The Wizard is a reference to shadows. Here it is again. It makes you wonder, if Marc Bolan is writing all this completely on his own, if he isn't a little bit haunted and worried, perhaps, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to pretend like I understand everything, and I don't want to pretend that I don't believe that there aren't strange things that happen that are unexplainable. I do think there are strange things that happen that are unexplainable. I'm open to other people's experiences of life. Perhaps there is some kind of spiritual interaction happening amongst other people. I don't know. I know my experience, and that's all I know. So I'm not going to judge. But I do know that Mr. Bolan is on the record as saying that he didn't think he was going to live really long. And there's several references to shadows kind of being around and being scared to sleep alone. So, a little bit interesting. Baby, doesn't everyone weep? I'd slap there beside you, but my nightmares, oh, too steep. So this person's dealing with nightmares. What that could be, I don't know. This, of course, this idea of sleeping with someone and having nightmares that are too steep and not being able to discuss these things. We just did Syd Barrett, The Wall and Final Cut. And this reminds me of the song that's discussing the idea of, are you fast asleep? Because I have something that I've hidden that's too dark to bear the light of day. Very similar kind of idea here between that song and this song. Baby, I want to buy you a Cadillac. I bought it with my song, but you say you're gonna give it back. Okay, so this is what catches my attention really with this song. And the reason for that is because Syd Barrett actually did buy a car, an American car, that was very similar to a Cadillac. It looks almost exactly like a Cadillac. My understanding is that it is not a Cadillac. And there are many, many photos of this, of Syd with this Cadillac. And I believe Mick Rock is the photographer that took these photos to promote the Madcap Laughs album. So why is, again, Mr. Bolan singing about having a Cadillac? Well, Cadillac is tied to American music intrinsically, so perhaps that's why. But who actually bought something like a Cadillac? Well, Syd Barrett did. He bought it with his song, but you say that you're going to give it back. That would imply, of course, that he tried to give this Cadillac to someone, but they didn't want it, and they give it back. If you go back and watch Peeling Syd Barrett, Apples and Oranges, we discuss this story. This reminds me of an interaction with someone. And this also would explain why Mr. Barrett, perhaps, if you think there's a connection here, I'm just going to say, if you think there's a connection here, this would explain why Syd Barrett would just leave the Cadillac out on the street getting parking tickets and never driving it, because he never intended it for himself. If you think that he actually is putting something into this song and it's tied to his story, then it kind of makes sense now that this actually was an intended gift for someone, but they didn't take it. And for that reason, perhaps Mr. Barrett didn't know what to do with it. I don't know. That's one reading. You'll just have to kind of decide on your own. But perhaps Mr. Bolan tried to buy someone a Cadillac as well, and they didn't want it and gave it back. I don't know. So that's pretty much it for the songs. And I'll just kind of finish up with a few ideas. The first is, of course, I do appreciate that folks have different views on these topics. I'm just kind of trying to give as many connections as I can as they come to me. As I stated before, I have a lot of respect for both of these musicians. Obviously, we just went through the Howlin' Wolf reference with Mr. Barrett. If you are familiar at all with The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, you know it's kind of a groovy album. And by groovy, I mean it's also kind of an R&B/dance album, which is, you really can't say that about very much Pink Floyd songs. So the idea that it's R&B influenced with kind of dance music shows that Mr. Barrett is interested, and of course he's interested in Howlin' Wolf. So looking at things from Mr. Barrett's point of view, if he did continue writing music, if he was writing music that was R&B related, could he give that music to Pink Floyd? I don't really think so. And the reason for that is because rock and roll music is kind of a niche market. In other words, once you establish the type of music that you make, if you veer from that, for most artists, your fans will not be happy. Some artists are able to do so, but they're fairly rare. So, for example, Metallica. When Metallica turned away from kind of this really heavy underground metal sound and kind of went pop, there was a lot of kickback. Same thing happened to Green Day when they sold out from the punk movement, and they also went pop. This has happened a number of times. Some artists, like for example Madonna, are able to change their style over time, but it's generally not very well accepted. So let's just point out that Mr. Barrett seemed to have an inclination for various tastes. If he was interested in writing R&B/dance music, who could he give it to? Who could he sell it to? Who could he work with to actually express this, if he was doing so? Well, in my opinion, one of the best people to do that with would be Marc Bolan. He was the absolute embodiment of R&B groovy music of that time, of that era in England. So, who knows? Perhaps the two guys were working together. You'll have to decide on your own. But for me, there are a lot of connections there that are interesting. So, it's kind of a nice story. In a way, I hope it's true. You know, I hope that they did get to work together. It certainly does seem like they would have, in my opinion, at any rate, would have considered each other friends. And Mr. Bolan had a long history of, although it was initially a little bit of a, I guess you could say, a difficult relation with David Bowie. Eventually, he became very good friends with David Bowie. And we also mentioned in our Peeling Syd series that Mr. Barrett as well had a little bit of a difficult relationship, apparently with Mr. Bowie early on, but that changed over time. So that's pretty much it. Those are my thoughts for influences between Marc Bolan and Pink Floyd and Syd Barrett. Hopefully I've done so in a coherent manner, and it's been enjoyable, and it gives you some things to think about. I certainly do enjoy all of this music, and I think that it's adding another layer to it for me that makes the music more enjoyable. If it does that for you as well, I'm happy to hear that. So that's all for today. Thanks for subscribing, checking out the video, listening through. Share it with other folks if you know other folks you think might be interested. and I will talk to you folks later.